On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we'll catch up on some of the latest news in the NFV and SDN space, as well as talk with Red Hat on its OpenStack progress.
Today's episode is brought to you by Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board, telecomcareers.net.
Hello, welcome to this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief here at RCR Wireless News. Thanks for joining us this week. Well, we'll start this week's show off with some news from the industry in terms of NFV and SDN. This week, we learned that Frontier Communications, a regional telecom provider, had selected Ericsson to provide integrated OSS architecture to improve the customer experience management for Frontier's recently acquired wireline operations in California, Texas, and Florida. Frontier recently purchased those assets from Verizon in a deal valued at more than $10 billion. Ericsson this week also announced a partnership with AT&T to demonstrate a telco virtualized network function in a platform-as-a-service environment integrated with OpenStack software. The POC is said to showcase advanced container technology designed to ease application deployment in an OpenStack environment. Also with AT&T, the company this week welcomed Nokia as part of its Domain 2.0 program. As many of you know, AT&T has been one of the big drivers of implementing SDN and NFV into its operations and has used this domain program to bring those vendors into the process. Well, on the topic of OpenStack, this week we also spoke with Red Hat, which is based a lot of its operations on the OpenStack software platform. The company has done a lot of work in advancing OpenStack, and we talked with the company about what it's seen in terms of the advancements in OpenStack and where it sees the technology going moving forward. Let's take a look at the interview now. All right, well, hey, thanks again for joining us. So maybe if you want to give us a little overview of Red Hat and how you guys work with the OpenStack and the OpenStack community there. That might be a good way to start off the conversation.
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. By the way of introduction, I'm Radhesh Balakrishnan. I run the OpenStack business at Red Hat. If you look at OpenStack as a community project, right from the days when the foundation was formed, Red Hat has been closely engaged with the OpenStack project. So we believe in truly participating in upstream contribution by having engineers contribute code. So if you look at the last few releases, we are one of the largest contributors of OpenStack code itself. But beyond the community contribution, we also focused on making sure that we take all that innovation, package that up, and make it available to enterprises and now telcos as well in a way that they can consume it with a peace of mind value proposition that Red Hat is known for. So the third thing that we also do is to make sure that we are catalyzing the whole ecosystem around OpenStack by making sure that we are certifying their solutions, be it at a hardware level or an ISV solution level, so that an end customer who is deploying an OpenStack-based solution that's from Red Hat not just has the confidence that the Red Hat provided distribution, but also the confidence that the set of solutions that come with it can also function and meet their needs. So that's in a nutshell our focus in the OpenStack space.
That sounds good. Sounds good. Well, obviously, I know we cover a lot more of the telecom side here, but it does seem like obviously, OpenStack's been around for quite some time, and you guys have been behind it for quite a while as well. I guess can you talk a bit about maybe some of the advances you've seen, or that the community has kind of developed recently in terms of advancing, I guess, the technology behind OpenStack. Obviously, in the telecom space, I know a lot of carriers are getting more and more behind OpenStack. It's being used a lot for SDN deployments, obviously. Can you talk a bit about, I guess, maybe some of the advances more recently in the technology?
Yeah, excellent question. So if you look at the last 18 months or so, NFV and SDN have been raging subjects from a telco carrier's service provider segment. Yeah. And the tier one telcos as well as the NEPs that we interact with are in different stages in terms of either offering solutions or adopting them if it's a tier one provider. The promise of OpenStack in this case is clearly breaking away from the tax of the proprietary past, where they are facing a linear cost curve that's associated with lockdown hardware and a proprietary software. So on a piece of paper, clearly, it's exciting to be embarking on a journey to break away from the shackles of the proprietary past. Now, to make sure that kind of the set of features and functionality that's needed for carriers to not just meet the needs currently, but also set them up to succeed in the future, we are focused on three areas, specific to telco, if you will. One is participate in, as well as be the catalyst in creating communities that are focused on identifying and prioritizing a list of features required for telco carriers to be successful, right? So these range from the OpenStack Foundation itself. Within that, there is a telco working group, the OP-NFV project, the ETSI NFV community, and last but not the least, the Open Daylight from an SDN perspective. So that's kind of the first step. And the progress report on that front is that if you just look at the last 12 months, we've seen that truly a global community has come together, recognizing the potential as well as identifying, hey, these are the prioritized set of issues that we work through. We can cite examples of HCPOCs, OP-NFV releases, etc. Right? So rewarding to see that just in a matter of 12 to 18 months, we've come this far from a concept on a paper to rallying around to be able to begin to deliver solutions. Second area that we are focused on as a software provider is, of course, making sure that true to our open source credentials, we are driving innovation at every level of the stack that's required to stand up an infrastructure that's based on OpenStack. So that starts with Linux, includes KVM from a hypervisor perspective, OpenStack, as Open Daylight from an SDN perspective. I'll even throw in Ceph from a storage perspective. So clearly, as you know, if not the largest contributor, or one of the largest contributors across all these projects, we commit engineers and make sure that we're driving the pace of innovation in these areas. So clearly, if you just look at the last 2 releases of OpenStack as an example, there are several telco-specific features that have been included to react to the needs in the market and the feedback from customers as well as NEPs in the market, right? NUMA, CPU pinning, IPv6 support from a tenant side. I could just go rattle on, but and even if you look ahead, if you look at the upcoming release of OpenStack, there are more sets of features that specific to quality of service around Neutron. That are driven by telco requirements. Or if you look even further ahead at the Mitaka release, which is going to come another 6 months from now, there is a whole focus on making sure that real-time capabilities are enabled to support radio access network for cloud providers, etc. So bottom line, ton of innovation. We're excited about being in the kitchen across these multiple pieces of technology. So the third element of what we do is to make sure that we package up all this innovation and make available a solution. So the solution that we have in the market is called RHEL OpenStack Platform. So the philosophy we have taken is that rather than create a separate telco carrier grade OpenStack solution, let's make OpenStack carrier grade. So a reflection of that is the offering that we have in the market. I'm happy to say that if you look at a Nokia, Alcatel, NEC, Cisco, etc., their NFV solutions, the NFVI layer, the infrastructure layer, is based on RHEL OpenStack platform. So we feel pretty good about the innovation phase, the adoption so far, as well as the prospect that holds for the whole industry because of the focus behind NFV.
Makes sense. Now, obviously, you kind of brought up the part about the carrier grade aspect. I mean, obviously, in the telco space, telecom operators have a certain history of offering a certain service level quality that customers expect. Obviously, enterprises expect as well, too. And that's always been kind of, I guess, a bit of concern when it comes to going towards an open source platform, I think, because it does seem like telecom operators do have this history of working with certain vendors. They get a comfort level with certain vendors. Obviously, a lot of information or a lot of the software is proprietary, which they're trying to change now. I guess what was the challenge for you guys in terms of making sure you were meeting that carrier grade requirement? Because that does seem, from the operators I've talked to, that was one of their initial concerns, and still obviously a concern for them to make sure that what they're offering out there does at least meet and hopefully exceeds what they've done legacy-wise in terms of the proprietary solutions out there. So, I mean, I guess what were the challenges there in terms of making sure you guys were up to those that carrier grade need?
Yeah, I guess the first fundamental challenge is that there's no canonical definition of what they carrier grade,
Sure,
right?
sure.
So over the last nearly a couple of years, we've been in leaning on the NEPs that we work with, as well as the tier one telcos, to help us be educated on what are these prioritized set of features that they want that make it carrier grade. So to me, if I were to abstract it to a high level, those have to do with determinism, as well as performance, and then potentially scale, right? So if you kind of bucket that from a architecture perspective, what are the features that we are driving there, then it's a much easier conversation to say, hey, let's talk about what are the target use cases that you're considering, and then let's make sure that we agree on a path to addressing any real or perceived gap that they see, right? So that's kind of a more of an iterative model to make sure that there's a clear understanding of what the expectations are and how we deliver against that. The second sort of related challenge, and you touched upon open source and kind of perception or lack of understanding around what open source itself entails. And this is probably the biggest area of opportunity as well as challenge for us, because telcos haven't been great in terms of being on the vanguard of adopting open source technology. And open source, adoption is in many ways, you're a contributor as well as a consumer at the same time, right? So getting that in the DNA of carriers is a long march that we're signed up to do, because we've done that on the enterprise side with large financial organizations, etc. So a lot of energy that we spend is actually educate them on how to go about approaching open source projects and how they could have their voice count in defining the future of this one. Once they kind of get the concept, then they're much more comfortable with embarking on the journey together. So I guess the first is more of a clear understanding of the feeds and speeds and being on the same page so that we can innovate. And second is more of a cultural change that's required so that we can together help address the challenge at hand in a truly open source way.
Yeah, that's the cultural part of it. That's a big part. I mean, obviously, telecom is slow to adopt, like you kind of hinted at. I mean, obviously, they've got a lot of history, but a lot of the people in charge at some of these telecom operators have that same kind of history, and they don't like to change things up very often. So, yeah, obviously, getting everybody kind of on board is big. I know, at least here in the U.S., obviously, AT&T is a big driver of this. I've talked to them quite a bit about this, and they're very big on open source and really driving a cultural change within the organization to really kind of adopt this and move in this direction. So yeah, it does seem like that is probably the biggest challenge, like you said, and obviously getting more and more carriers on board helps drive the open source community too. So it's one of those perpetual things. Once you get it moving, it gets better and better. So that seems to be, like you said, you guys are tackling it. It seems like a pretty good pace as well too. So
yeah, I mean, the reality and the good news also is that CIOs of pretty much any organization today have to deal with this, new pace of innovation, a new paradigm. How does cloud impact their, journey of their infrastructure to how they deliver solutions in the market, etc. So clearly the carriers are not oblivious to that reality. So it's not like, they're in an island all by themselves trying to figure that out. So they got good company across other verticals as well to be inspiring as well as inspired by, if you will.
Yeah, and it seems like too. I mean, obviously, the larger the organization, probably the more prone they are, or more apt they are to adopt these type of services going forward. To them, obviously, the AT&Ts, the DTs of the world, the NTT Docomos, the ones that are really driving this. That are obviously large companies, and again, those are probably the hardest to change from an organizational point of view because they are such big organizations. But to get everybody on board, obviously, it's a big move for the operators to do that too. So make good progress there. But I guess as you look, across. I mean, as OpenStack kind of gains a lot of momentum, I was reading some stuff earlier about, there are some concerns about perhaps is it losing its flexibility or its scalability component? I mean, obviously, as you become more, maybe not mainstream, but as you become used more and more, I mean, it does seem like at some point that certain parts of it have to be kind of nailed down to a certain standard. And once standards are kind of set, they tend to be hard to change at times. I guess how do you approach, or how does the OpenStack community approach, being still at the forefront of this evolution, but also being flexible enough to change fairly rapidly to kind of meet what's still a fairly early phase deployment for a lot of these companies?
Yeah, I think in my head, the short answer is the fact that, roughly a year ago, end of 2014 is when the telecom working group was started.
Yeah.
The very mission of the working group within OpenStack Foundation is to actually define use cases, prioritize feature set, think through what are not just the day one problem, but day two, day three problem of living with OpenStack, right? So you add to that the good discipline of meeting twice a year, the governance that exists from the OpenStack Foundation, etc. We've got the ingredients needed to bring the focus as well as to kind of missionarily focus on the prioritized set of issues to focus on. So it's just a question of how soon can we get there rather than can we address the gap, in my view. The second aspect also is we as a technology provider, we also have a scale lab, a performance lab, and we work with some of the industry leaders such as Intel's and Cisco's of the world to make sure that we're pushing the envelope to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the carriers in the market. So I guess it does truly take the village to address need at hand, but the good news is the village is already aware of the need and has already come together. So then it's a question of continuing to provide the technology leadership and driving innovation the truly open way. So I don't believe there's a lack of flexibility. In fact, I think just the way OpenStack itself is structured on a 6-month cadence, etc., lends itself nicely to be a good balance between stability as well as being flexible enough to meet the emerging needs there. So I don't fundamentally believe we need to be concerned about that. And with the focus that's not just coming from the community, but also from the ecosystem players, only great things can be happening as we go along.
Sure. I guess taking a step back to looking at the whole environment of SDN and NFV and kind of virtualization right now, do you guys feel that the standards process, because it does seem to be at some point standards will have to be in there, and obviously telecom operators like standards to an extent. Does it seem like the whole community itself is working well together to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same path? I mean, I know Etsy's doing a lot of work behind the scenes. You mentioned OPNFV, Open Daylight, Owen Labs. I mean, all these different organizations are out there kind of working at different slices of the pie as well. Does it seem like at the end of the day that everybody, or hopefully at the end of the day, everybody's kind of working towards the same goal of making sure that this is really providing robust advances for telecom operators as they move towards this virtualization path?
Yeah, I think especially the telecom working group, the Etsy and OPNFE focus. Clearly, the charter is to make sure that we are coming together despite our what could be potentially slightly different takes of what it takes to win. Or to solve the problem, we coming together in terms of how do you go about addressing from a feature perspective to implementation perspective to living with the solution on a longer term, right? So we're bullish on the ability to collectively solve that problem. Now, have you reached the stage where, hey, all these standards have been defined and then we can all go home? Clearly not, right? And it's of course complicated by the fact that the pace of innovation, just look at things like containers as a technology area, DevOps as an approach that's being taken by organizations, etc. If you have to embrace the pace of innovation, but at the same time get to some standards, then it does take some coming together at multiple levels, and that's why I think every body that we talked about has a role to play. I haven't seen any violent conflicts in terms of mission that goes down yet.
That's good. Yeah, but it's good because every time I talk to people about this, I always ask them what their challenges that they see, and kind of like you mentioned, I mean, it always seems like depending on the month or whatever, it's always a new challenge or something else that pops up. Because again, the pace of advancement of this is going so rapidly. I mean, the containers issue. I mean, that was something that 6 months ago I hadn't even heard about that yet. And obviously, I'm not as in deep with this as you guys are. But then over the past 2 or 3 months, so most people I've talked to have brought that up as something that they're tackling now as well. So it does seem like every 3 or 4 months there's this new buzzword or whatever it is that people are trying to get a handle on and trying to refine, but at the same time trying to work behind the scenes on the stuff that's maybe has kind of dropped from the headlines a little bit. But it's a continuous work, it seems like, making sure that everybody's working towards the same goal on this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the exciting thing is that all these new things, while you might put them as buzzwords, are all fundamentally changing the ability of organizations to innovate and deliver innovation at a pace which has not been seen before, right? So that's why kind of the adoption curve or hype cycle around these are quickly peaking, and then while we are still in the phase of getting to production deployment on NFV, there are several large carriers who are already saying, hey, let's start thinking about what will be the impact of containers. How does that change us from a technology roadmap perspective, but also from a culture perspective, something we touched upon earlier, right? So I think, to me, this is all good thing, right? So when we are ready to face the future with an open mind, saying, hey, look, there's going to be more changes. How do we navigate through that? That creates an amazing opportunity as long as we can come together to address that in a systematic way. It's a huge upside for the whole industry.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Now, I guess looking at I guess at a timing aspect of all of this. I mean, I know us in the media like to have firm dates so that if a dateline happens to pass, we can always point our fingers at people. But as you look at kind of the rollout of virtualization, and at least in telecom space, what sort of timing in general do you see for this? And I know some of the operators, AT&T, for instance, Telefonica, are already starting to put in some deployments as it is, tapping into SDN for some of their controls. I mean, do you see a certain timing on when we're going to see a broader rollout of this? I mean, are we still, it seems like we're kind of obviously deep in the POC phase, but, at some point, some of this stuff is going to start being commercialized. What's your view on kind of, I guess, the timing aspect of virtualization using NFV and SDN, at least for the telecom sector?
Right. So, clearly there are 200 plus 250, maybe 300 as we are talking. POC is already underway. Yeah. So that's well documented, much spoken about. From our vantage point, what we are seeing is that calendar year 2016 is where the initial production deployments are going to be. And then calendar year 2017 is where, the takeoff of massive deployments is going to be happening, right? So to 2017 and 2018 is where we are seeing the maturation of not just the deployment, but also, the day 2, 3 of management, all the tooling around that coming together. So hopefully that jives with some of what you're hearing as well.
No, it does. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I know, last year, a lot of people were saying 2015, you might start seeing things, but it did seem like 2015 was more of the POC phase, really. But you're right. It does seem like 2016, 2017, then 2018, more maturation of it. But again, it does seem like there are so many challenges still. I mean, obviously, you mentioned the management, the orchestration stuff is still a big part of this as well, too. I mean, for telecom space, obviously, a lot of legacy equipment still out there, having to kind of manage and orchestrate between the new and the old. Is going to be a challenge for a lot of those companies that I'm sure will keep a lot of people up at night and have their phones buzzing on weekends when things don't work right. And so that's going to be a big part. But yeah, I think timing does seem to be probably about right what you're saying in terms of at least for the telecom guys.
Yeah, and the good news also is that several of the carriers, given the fact that this is going to be a multi-year journey, are picking a workload or two, which they think they can prove the ROI on, and then expand thereof. Right. The good news is even if you were to do 10%. There is enough ROI, right? So it's not one of those binary, hey, we got to do it for 10 years and then after that somebody's going to come and say we saved money, right? So there's definitely payoff as we go along in this journey. That makes it exciting. So then it's a question of, like you said, can we remove all the obstacles along the way so that we can accelerate that, which as a provider, as a software provider, that's, core to our mission, if you will.
Sure, yeah. And obviously the financial part of it is always good to, at the end of the day, get the CFO to sign off on these moves as well, too. If you can at least show that there is going to be return on this fairly rapidly, that always makes it easier to get the approval process running along, too. So that's a big part, too. Well, I guess, maybe as a wrap-up question, as you look forward a little bit, what do you see as kind of maybe the big challenge or two still facing the market in terms of getting telecom on board with this? I mean, maybe like a short-term challenge, maybe a little more longer term. You see it that kind of needs to be tackled, that you see as maybe being a hurdle that needs to be overcome for the space.
I believe you touched upon at least the culture aspect. So it's worth kind of coming back and saying, hey, look, it's not, culture doesn't change overnight. So it requires leadership and, mandate from the top, or if not, worst case, a burning platform moment, which we hope, not a lot of organizations will have to get to. Right? So I think the culture aspect clearly requires the stewardship from the top. So that's a critical dependency here. Outside of that, even if you just look at the on paper value prop of OpenStack being this flexible open infrastructure and the ability to mix and match things so that you have flexibility, because it's all API based and it's software driven, you have flexibility. But a lot of carriers that I talk to begin to worry about, does that mean I got to deal with 15 different vendors? I sleep at night, will be back to the beeper days, right? So I think that's a real under-the-nose a challenge that's facing us. Now, we're kind of taking a kind of two-step approach to addressing that. From a product perspective, we're doing everything within our means to make sure that different solutions and the permutation combinations can be tested in lab scenarios, as well as we can participate in proof of concepts to test them out, etc.
Mm-hmm.
The second aspect we're also focused on is, create enough body of knowledge around reference architecture, etc. Kind of the notes from the field, if you will, to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that there's reinforcement of best practices there, right? So I think as some of the initial adoptions and rollouts go in 2016, we'll get to a much richer place and comfort, and it's just there's no running away from doing it to gain the confidence, if you will. So that's kind of the runway challenge that I think the whole industry is trying to address outside of the culture challenge we talked about.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. It does seem like, too, because the fact that OpenStack has been around for a while, and it seems like, again, a lot of carriers are getting behind it, vendors are getting behind it, that at least the support aspect of OpenStack is keeping that, I guess, at the forefront of at least the comfort level for telecom operators. I mean, a lot of technologies, come in with a huge hype cycle and then burn off really quickly, and that kind of makes telecom guys nervous all the time. But it seems like, at least with OpenStack, it's got enough runway behind it, and it seems like enough support behind it, that I'm guessing the comfort level, I'm sure you're talking to operators all the time, but I'm sure the comfort level, at least for them, in using OpenStack as a basis for a lot of their work, the comfort level is there for them. And that's probably a big part of it, because, again, this is, as we've already talked about, a big change for these guys. And again, they don't want to be, like we said, woken up on weekend mornings about something not working and, freaking out about what's happening here and there. So it does seem like at least OpenStack has that support and basis behind it to make this at least a good platform for these guys to really start making that move towards virtualization.
Absolutely. I mean, just to kind of juxtapose that to the reality in the enterprise space.
Yeah.
In enterprise space, OpenStack is one of the many options that an organization, tends to look at as an alternative to get to. They have a legacy virtualization implementation, or they're looking at, other cloud offerings. And oftentimes when we are having the conversation, depending on how much of, a Red Hat customer or not, OpenStack figures in the discussion. If it's a carrier discussion, by default, it starts with OpenStack. That's a good thing. So then it's going down to the level of, hey, how do I get what all I need to be able to get from OpenStack? So I think from a starting point perspective, it's a far more exciting place, telco carriers. So much so that we as an organization, we are kind of doubling down as a telco as an opportunity area for OpenStack. We've also made organizational changes from a go-to-market side, in addition to the product focus, to make sure that we are going after the telco opportunity with OpenStack as the key calling card. And the good news also is that we have other assets. We talked quite a bit about OpenStack. We're clearly driving the container agenda. We're also invested in other open source storage solutions, etc., which have an attached open source management solutions as well. So we have a lot to bring to bear, if you will, over a period of time. So we're very, very excited and bullish about the opportunity ahead and where we are set up.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely been fun watching kind of, again, as this evolves and as operators get more and more on board with this, finding their comfort level and how they're kind of working with the deployments, where they're using it, where they're not using it. It's definitely, at least from a media perspective, it's great to watch and kind of follow how they're doing it. Obviously, you guys are in the middle of that, so doing a lot of work on that side too. So I'm sure it's keeping long hours for you guys too, which is keeps you out of trouble if anything else. So that's always a good thing. But
that's right. As they say, spending long hours on something you love is passion, right? So as again, spending long hours on something that you don't like, which is stress, right? So we're clearly, passionate about what we're doing and excited about the long hours that come with it, because, truly we have an opportunity to play a catalytic role in how the industry is shaping. And we're also, we got tall, broad shoulders, some of the NEPs that I mentioned, as well as the, Intels of the world aligned with us. So it's an exciting time for all of us put together.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, hey, Radhesh, definitely appreciate the great insight on this. Obviously, it's a topic that we can spend probably several hours on. We've kind of really just touched the surface on a lot of things here. And again, as this kind of evolves and moves along, I'm sure we can touch base again and maybe get some more insight from you guys. But again, we definitely appreciate the time. Thanks so much for the insight. And it was great talking to you.
Likewise. Thanks. Cheers.
All right. Thanks again. Well, that'll do it for this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. Thanks for checking out this week's show. And make sure to check us out again next week.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN, and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.